So in today's video, I'm going to discuss, should you have a role model? And this is a question which is often put forward by people, especially when they are starting their careers, is that if they should have a role model and how to find a role model. Now, I would say a role model is a psychological device to motivate you. And essentially, when you have reached the age of college or beyond, you have had a series of experiences in your life, and you have looked at people who have done well in life and who have done badly, and therefore you have figured out what is a good or what is a bad role model for you. Now, this case is of course very dependent on your personal predilections, because not all people share the same values, and therefore some people may choose role models who are very successful in business, who have made a lot of money. Somebody else may choose a role model who is a great scientist, who is a person who has made a big impact in the field in terms of social work, a politician, a policeman, a nurse, a school teacher, or a professor. So, depending on the people you have seen, the experiences you have had, your role models are likely to be very different. Now, here, of course, I'm talking of positive role models. Now, unfortunately, there may be situations where people have had a series of negative experiences and they may have selected negative role models. Now, this is something which people don't talk about a lot, but this is also a situation which often happens with people, and people who are stuck in situations where they are surrounded by people who make their living by crime or by nefarious activity may actually end up choosing role models belonging to these disciplines. So the question is, what should you really do here? How should you select a role model? So I should say the first thing is you should try to select a role model who has done something positive in their life. And in this case, you should not look at role models who are extremely selfish, because it is rarely the case that extremely selfish people do a lot of positive in their life over the very long run. Now, one of the things the role model can help you do is that this person can help you chart out a career path, and you can look at their life to determine a pattern which you need to take. So if many of your role models have attended the top schools in the country, have gone to top colleges, have done graduate degrees and so on, then you know the path you want to take. If the role models have taken part in various sports activity, have taken part in social services, then again you know the path you need to take. And so the advantage of having role models is that they do tell you which college you need to go to, which major you should study, what are the jobs you should aspire for, should you aspire to start a business, and so on. So now look at some of the role models which are out there. So again, for many scientists, somebody like Gauss could be a role model. Gauss published papers throughout his life. At the end of his life, he had centuries of papers. So you could have somebody like that as a role model if you are a scientist. If you are a business person, you could probably have somebody like Bill Gates as a role model, who essentially pioneered an entire field by coming up with the personal computer and then creating software which has made productivity very easy for a plethora of people around the world. So there are people who actually believe that Bill Gates has done more for humankind than some of the people who have taken part in social service. So if you are a writer, you may find somebody like John Grisham, who is a very prolific writer, to be a role model if you are into the business of writing thrillers. If you are somebody who likes to write drama, then you may have Shakespeare as your role model. Going back to business and software, various founders of software business companies and startups could be your role model. Your role model could be a professor who has been very good in teaching a particular class throughout his life, and therefore has percolated a subject throughout the country or community in which he lives. It could be a school teacher who has helped a plethora of people come up in their life and so on. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that the role model is essentially a path dependent process, and sometimes the role model may become dated. So if a person has followed a particular path, such as Bill Gates, it may not be possible to follow that path once again. The new path may be different, and therefore you may need to have a different trajectory here. So again, the role model should be used only for guidance and not for a complete following in terms of their path. So the second thing is that sometimes if you have role models who are relatively young, then it may be the case that they may peak at a certain point and they may have a downfall due to scandal or some problem. So again, keep that in mind, that a role model is not necessarily somebody who will always work out for the good, because the people have both positive and negative aspects in most cases. Now, if you are looking at a role model such as Bill Gates, who probably dropped out of college, then you may think that this is a good idea. But always remember that this is path dependent, and therefore what happened at a certain time may not work today. And then there are always people who drop out of college because they are too intelligent for college and the professors could not keep up with them. And there are people who drop out of college because they are too lazy or stupid for college. So there is a demarcation here. Now, I personally feel that, like classical books and established institutes, the role model should be somebody who has lived a long time ago and probably has passed on. So these type of role models have lived their entire life, and therefore by reading the biography or life history of these people, you will experience the positive, negative and complete things which take place during a lifespan, which you may not give or not get from a current role model who is still living. Now, sometimes I actually feel that people get too obsessed with role models, and role models have a negative impact in terms of demarcation on things such as race, gender and country, so on, because many people like to see the role model and like to picture themselves in that scenario, and they are not able to do this because of their gender or their race or their nationality or their religion. And therefore there is an effort to diversify all the possible professions, but again this may not help much, because in the end you may diversify the entry situations, but the outcomes are very complex processes, and therefore you cannot diversify the outcomes as to who are successful startups and so on. So there may be a lot of people who may not find appropriate role models, and therefore it may actually be good for many people not to have a role model, because it will help you to chart out your own path. Because sometimes a role model may have had a lot of advantages because of his or her upbringing and the society and the times in which they lived, which the current person may not have. So the current person may actually go off on a completely different situation. So for example, if a person today wants to create a startup, it is much better to create a startup on something which is software related, which has very little in terms of infrastructure and capital spending needs than in terms of hardware. So these are some aspects to keep in mind, that your particular plan for the future should gel with the times which you live in, the location geographically where you live in, and your own pedigree and predilections, because you should not have role models who actually become negative creations in your own mind, and therefore may actually set you on a path which is not really your path, but which may be the path of somebody else. And this is especially important when parents or teachers try to force role models on you. Do not take role models from such people, and do not try to make such people your role models, because it is much better to have role models who are quite out there, whom you really don't know very well, and therefore you can project a very positive thinking about these people. Because in many cases, when you get to know people very well, you will find they have various lacunas in their characters and various discrepancies, and there is a huge fall for the person who has been put on a pedestal. So these are some aspects I had for you today about choosing role models, and I made this video because some young person asked me about how to choose role models and so on. And again, I did not particularly answered the question. I just pointed out that there are good and negative points of having role models, and depending on your situation you can look at some of these aspects. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned to my channel for more such videos. Thank you very much.